One time.
You know, we're talking about some big, serious, and important issues here today, whether it's taxes or banking, primarily how this industry operates in conflict with federal law every day, right? So I want each of your perspective on the future of these issues, especially as they relate to the federal government agencies that are regulating them. So James, 280E, Form 8300, do you think these things and their conflict with the cannabis industry are even on the IRS's radar? Is this something they think about or they're aware of?
Definitely it's on their radar.
Yeah.
And we're seeing not only Colorado, but California, Arizona, New Mexico, these are all, 280E is all hot button items with the IRS in those states as it's expanding into other states. The IRS, as far as audits are concerned, are usually 2-3 years back in back of what's going on with the industry, just because they don't start the audits until a couple years after you file the tax return.
Which would explain why the audits are picking up now that we're almost 3 years into these recreational sales, right?
Exactly.
Okay.
So what you're seeing with the pickup of the audits is the IRS getting very interested in the industry. So the idea that the IRS is suddenly going to lose interest, I don't think is going to happen anytime soon, at least. 280E, as far as whether it's going to be continued to be applied to the industry, there's going to be one of two solutions. It's either going to be a judicial solution, there's going to be a judge that stands up and says enough is enough, or there's going to be a political solution where Congress says enough is enough. One of those two things is going to happen. When it's going to happen, I don't know.
And do you have any idea which one you think is more likely to happen?
We have a number of cases in our office that are going through the courts right now. We are cautiously optimistic
that it'll be a judicial.
Yeah, that we will. Yeah, we'll have some type of positive judicial outcome in there. Can't say for certain, but we are cautiously optimistic. Form 8300. That's just going to go wherever the rest of the industry goes there. That's more of a cash compliance question. Whether there's going to be the larger prosecutions goes into the political stuff that we already discussed.
Sure. So the IRS is all too aware of these things, and I get the impression from your answer that you don't think the IRS agrees with the cannabis industry when they sit, John Lord, the owner of LiveWell, 17, 18 shops throughout the entire state, one of the largest legal businesses probably in the world, sat on this couch 3-4 months ago and extolled how unfair 280E is to marijuana businesses. The IRS, do you think they agree with that? I know you mentioned that there's some political motivation behind this too, or there potentially is.
There are definitely people within the IRS, I believe, that do not want to see the industry flourish and are using the laws for that purpose. I do think there's others within the IRS, though, that want to see the industry flourish, but they are just doing their job.
Sure, I understand that. Okay. And Lamine, on your front, let's switch to banking.
Sure.
Do you think the Federal Reserve, you think officials there are all that aware of the hoops the cannabis industry is jumping through daily if a majority of them still don't have access to traditional banking services? Is this something they're aware of? Is this something they care about?
Sure. I certainly can't speak for the Federal Reserve. I can tell you the Treasury, my former employer, had a really spotty awareness. It's an interesting conundrum, and I don't doubt the Federal Reserve operates in a really similar fashion. In fact, most bank regulators do. You have sort of segmentation of duties, if you will. So he evoked an interesting term earlier, BSA, the Bank Secrecy Act. So anything within the sphere of Bank Secrecy Act is handled by very specific people with the expertise that understand the Bank Secrecy Act requirements. And interestingly, the federal government, came out and said, this is the act, this is the law to guide this industry. And the law provides two very interesting lenses. One is the money laundering, the other is terrorist financing, and these are the two biggest risks that the industry presents to the federal government. So that said, individuals outside of BSA function, if you will, a little spotty. Perhaps division heads may be aware that they probably get briefed on a weekly basis on what's going on with the banks engaged in a space. But besides that, the experts know, the non-experts probably don't.
And so in general, is it fair to say that this isn't a priority for federal banking regulators?
Unfortunately, that's very true. Yeah, that is not a priority for bank regulators, and predominantly because there are very few institutions that operate in the space. And regulators, by nature, are very reactive versus being proactive. That's the way that, not just culturally, but the system, the way it's set up. So regulators look at risk at hand, and they say, we have 3 institutions currently engaged in the industry. So that's pretty contained, small number. We can manage this effectively. And that's how they essentially do it. They manage those institutions and the risk that these particular banks present, or credit unions for that matter. So outside of that, it's out of sight, out of mind. And politics is another important factor here. Technocrats are inherently political, despite the fact that they're technocrats. So they want to say and do right things to essentially progress,
sure,
career-wise. Yeah.
Well, James mentioned if there's change going to happen on the IRS side of things, that maybe it's going to happen judicially or congressionally. What about on this front? We've seen lawsuits, certainly against the Federal Reserve and against the National Credit Union Association, the NCUA. Right. How do you think change is going to happen here, if it's going to happen?
I wish I had a crystal ball. I'm not sure, but I can tell you one thing. Even if cannabis is completely descheduled as a substance, marijuana will still have a banking problem, right? Banks are not going to jump in bed with cannabis. There'll be more banks. I think the last statistic I heard, 350 banks nationwide currently offering services in a very limited capacity. But we may have 500, 600 banks. And to give you an example, for instance, alcohol industry. How many years since Prohibition? 70 years or something?
Yeah, 70, 80.
70, 80 years. When we used to go into banks and look at their high-risk accounts, we would always look for liquor store accounts, which were treated with much more intense due diligence, essentially monitoring. So it costs a lot of banks money to monitor liquor store accounts. Most people don't know that.
Wow, yeah. And what years are we talking? When were you at the OCC? When was this happening?
This is just last year. Yeah, just last year. So
in 2015, liquor stores were seen as high risk?
As high risk, highly stigmatized by both regulators and banks. That's why a lot of banks, frankly, opt out of opening accounts to liquor stores. And a lot of liquor stores are not cash intensive. They are operating predominantly with credit cards, essentially.
Sure.
So that, if they will give you a glimpse into what's going to happen with cannabis going forward. There'll still be a need for enhanced due diligence, for sort of an intense oversight of these relationships by banks. So despite of what happens, unfortunately, banking is going to continue being a hurdle for the space.
James, any thoughts to add on that?
I think he's covered it pretty well, quite frankly.